I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
The most important words of my life.
I'm here tonight.
I stand
before you today
to declare that I am a candidate
for President of the United States.
I am running
for President of the United States.
I officially announce my candidacy
for President of the United States.
I'm running for president.
I am officially running
for President of the United States.
From the University of Virginia Center for Politics, this is Sabato's Crystal Ball, America Votes.
Welcome, everybody, to our 11th Crystal Ball webinar. It just doesn't seem possible that we're at 11, but we are. And by the way, we're going to have a special 12th by popular demand on Monday. And Kyle will be giving you more instructions about that, and we'll be releasing our final projections and predictions at that time. So join us on Monday. It will be well worth your time. As for today, before I turn it over to Kyle, I have a little surprise for him. You may have noticed that Kyle has looked harried recently. He has been stretched and he's got deep circles under his eyes. And yes, normally that's due to me. I make him work, 20 out of 24 hours. But he's got another special reason. Kyle and Lottie, his wife, had their very first child last week. I think it was October 21st. There he is. And it's Albert Albie is the name. Albert Albie Walker Condick. And incredibly, Kyle has already recruited him onto the Crystal Ball team. He's interpreted his coups as saying politics is a good thing. And what bothers me is he's recruited him to vote Kyle's way in our team as we come up with these final ratings. So I can't win because Miles joins Kyle and Albie and it's 3-1. So I can't be held responsible for anything the Crystal Ball does this year. Kyle, take it away.
I mean, honestly, Larry, for some of these states, we could give little Albie like a blue block and a red block and just have him pick and, maybe he'll do better. I mean, who knows?
It's possible.
Specifically thinking of Florida, which is just, but we'll get into that. So Larry, thanks. And
congratulations to you and Lottie. We're thrilled.
We are very lucky that he's such a great little kid, and mom and the little one are doing well. And I appreciate everyone at the Center for Politics kind of picking up the slack while I was away for a bit, although it was a good reason.
It was a very good reason. And Miles deserves the credit for carrying the ball.
Absolutely. And so, Miles Coleman, third member of our team, is with us today. It is Thursday, October 29th, 5 days until Election Day, although it looks like more than half the vote across the country is basically already in. You've got certain localities in places like Texas that are already basically at 100% of their votes cast from 2016. So the voting is coming fast and furious. If this is your first time viewing the program, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube to follow our YouTube channel, UVACFB. And that's where you're going to find our 12th special episode on Monday. We'll be posting at hopefully around 2 o'clock like we usually do on Monday as we come up with our final picks. We're also going to release the last Crystal Ball newsletter before the election sometime on Monday, probably Monday morning. So look out for that. And that'll also be on centerforpolitics.org/Crystal Ball. If you would like to support this broadcast and other work in the Center for Politics, just text USA Votes to 41444. And finally, our documentary series on the challenges facing democracy here in abroad, Dismantling Democracy, is now available on Amazon Prime. So look for that there. In the second half of today's program, Miles and I are going to be talking with Scott Tranner of Decision Desk HQ, which is the great vote counting website. They do their basically own independent vote counting there. They do a great job with it. They'll be trying to call the races best they can on Tuesday night. Scott's going to give us a lot of tips about what to look for on election night and how he and other decision-making groups are going to be handling what's going to be a different kind of election night than we're used to. So with that, Larry, 5 days out, what's your read on things?
Well, first, I want to give a shout out to Decision Desk HQ. They've been our partners before. They're our partners now. They're great partners, and we are thrilled to be associated with them, and we hope that they feel the same way about us. So I just give a salute to them. What is happening? Look, the polling average as of today, Thursday, before the election, is between 8 and 9% lead for Joe Biden. That's national. And that's a healthy lead, assuming that the data machine isn't broken. And I want you to know, on behalf of the Crystal Ball, that I have already gone out and with my own money, no state money was used, no federal money was used, none of your money was used. I bought a sledgehammer. And so we're going to go to work on that data machine and destroy it if, in fact, 2 elections in a row, it's wrong. And yes, last time the national average was fine, and it was the state polls before you all write me and tell me, shame on me for criticizing polls. Okay, that is a healthy lead for Biden, all right? In the swing states, though, it is closer. Now, in some of them, it isn't that much closer, and a few of them even exceed the national average. But what ought to worry the Biden team is a poll I saw the other day, good poll, from California that had Joe Biden leading by 36 percentage points. Of course, Hillary Clinton won California by a mile. Sounds like great news for Biden, doesn't it? It isn't, because all of those votes ahead of or over the one plurality that he needs, plurality of one vote in California to get 100% of the electoral votes from California, all those other votes are wasted. And they tend to inflate his polling average, his national average in the polls. So we certainly think you'd rather be Joe Biden than Donald Trump right now. But I think it's important to point out that we can see a path, a clear path for Donald Trump to get to 270. Not that it's easy. A clear path doesn't mean an easy path. And that's where I think the national race is, and we'll get into the Senate races, I'm sure, as well.
This morning we made a couple of changes. We moved both of the Senate races in Georgia to toss-up, and so one of those races is almost certainly going to go to a runoff, the special election, and then potentially the other one might too. That leads to our first question from Jim Comerford, who lives in Atlanta and is a member of the Center for Politics board. And he says, who is more likely to be unpopular with their respective Senate campaign committee the week after the election? Cal Cunningham in North Carolina or Doug Collins in Georgia? Miles, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that the prospect of Collins running was sort of always baked into the Georgia election. That's a calculation when in Georgia, when Governor Brian Kemp first appointed Loeffler, Collins would never really rule out running. So that's just something that we've had him on all along. But with the Cunningham thing, that was just a boneheaded thing by the candidate that sort of lacked discipline. And I would say, if the Republicans lose the Senate, it's probably not going to be because of that Georgia seat. But if the Democrats can't pick up the chamber, it may well be because of North Carolina. And I think because that Georgia election is a special election, even if the Republicans lose it, just thinking after this election, next election cycle, they're going to have another crack at Warnock because he'll be up if he wins again.
And I mean, Cal Cunningham, of course, had this affair, and it still seems like he's leading, but I don't know. North Carolina is one where, you talk about some of these really close states in the Electoral College. North Carolina seems really, really close right now. The Senate might very well go along with the presidential. And, speaking of like Georgia and North Carolina, Larry, those states are sometimes thought of as kind of moving together. Maybe Georgia's been a little bit more Republican recently, but there are some people who believe that maybe Georgia might actually be a little bit better of a target for Joe Biden, who was just in Georgia on Tuesday.
Yes, to compare with another state, I think Georgia's a better target for Joe Biden than Texas. I know that many people have moved Texas to toss up. I know that there are a lot of people who think Texas will finally turn blue, and I salute you. That's bold to take an ahistorical point of view, and that is ahistorical, unless, like me, you think yesterday was 1976 when Jimmy Carter carried Texas. He certainly carried Georgia. But I would be much more inclined to see Georgia put in Biden's column than Texas. Personally, and I haven't argued this with Albie yet, much less Kyle and Miles, but I personally think Texas is likely to still end up with Trump by a few points. I don't know what the final margin will be, but Georgia is to me, remarkable. Both Senate seats being essentially tied, potentially going to runoff. The presidential race, they're essentially tied. This is not your father's Georgia. It's certainly not your grandfather's Georgia. Probably, thank goodness.
That's a good seg to the question from Mark Holmes. I was wondering why some states like Texas and Georgia are so close this year. Isn't it something that could make them battleground states in the future? And so just my own 2 cents here. Yes, I think there are going to be battleground states going forward. And there's a combination of factors. First of all, both states are relatively diverse racially, and so that's maybe helpful to Democrats. But I'd say more so it's growth for Democrats in typically really conservative, highly educated, affluent suburban areas in places like Metro Atlanta, most notably in Georgia, but also Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, Austin. And that's really what's driving it. And Miles, you did some research on Beto O'Rourke's Senate race in 2018. And I think what you found is that the reason that O'Rourke got so close was not necessarily because of improving in heavily diverse Hispanic areas, but rather those suburban areas we're talking about.
Oh yeah, I mean he came about as close to winning Texas as a Democrat did in decades, and for the longest time. A lot of Democrats, especially in the Obama era, would say, "Okay, well, if we're going to flip Texas, it's probably going to be because of the growing Hispanic vote." That's part of it, but yeah, I mean, O'Rourke really, if you look at places like Collin County, areas like that, where he just really did about as well as a Democrat has really ever done in recent history. It was from a lot of his gains with the college-educated whites, and it's kind of talking about Georgia as well. When you look at what changed in Georgia from 2012 to 2016, the county where Hillary most improved on Obama's margin was it's this one county in the Atlanta area called Forsyth. And it's a Republican county. It's very highly educated, but it was a difference from going, Obama got something like 15, 18% of the vote there. And like Clinton was still in the 20s. So that tells me that there's a lot of room for the Democrats to go in those types of areas too.
Let's move to our next question here. See a lot of talk on election Twitter about how district level polls are more in line with state national polling than in 2016 when they showed cratering support for Clinton in more working class districts. Can you talk about this a little bit more? I think it's been pretty striking that some places like Michigan's 3rd district around Grand Rapids, Northeast Pennsylvania's 8th district, those are places that Trump did decently well in 2016, and we're seeing district level results that really show Biden doing quite well. And so that, I think, kind of adds a little bit of backstop to some of the state level polling that shows Biden doing pretty well in those states. I don't know if either Larry or Miles has anything to add to that.
Well, I agree with you, Kyle. I think it's important that we look at the granular polling level. And I've learned the hard way over the years, when it's backing up the state level polls, I have more confidence in it, in the state level polls. When it's not, it makes me question the state level polls. We should have done more of that in 2016. So yes, I think that's important. And also, just for people who maybe are not as familiar with the polling process, this is not a cookbook where, step 1, boil water. Step 2, drop pasta in. Every pollster has a different methodology, defining likely voters, for example, or selecting respondents. You can name 100 things easily that each pollster has to decide on his or her own. So keep that in mind. And when they do coincide, either something phenomenal is happening that is affecting adversely the polling in a particular race, or more likely, it means that the results within a generous margin of error are probably right. And I think that's where we are this year. I'm hoping not to use that sledgehammer. I really am. I'm not a destructive person.
Question from Kevin Murray. Is there any way to use all this early voting data to influence our state-by-state predictions on the presidential and Senate races? I I personally think that you've got to be leery about doing that. So there's a lot of that data out there, but I don't necessarily know if it's all that helpful. Miles, what do you think?
Yeah, it's what I'm seeing with the early vote is, there are definitely a lot of, you can definitely tell people are enthused to get out there to vote. But I could have told you earlier this year, before we had the pandemic, that this was going to be a very high turnout election. So in some ways, it's not too surprising.
The one guy who's really done well over the years in using the early vote is John Ralston in Nevada, but even Nevada is a little different this year. There's a lot of mail-in voting, but other states, it's just, there's a lot of information, but it's not necessarily all that helpful. Next question from Katie Johnson. Just want to go to Larry. As the election nears, and as Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed on the Supreme Court earlier this week, I'm hearing Democratic panic anew that this election might end as the 2001 did, decided by the Supreme Court on party lines. Is that something that we should be thinking about?
Well, theoretically, it's possible because it actually happened in 2000. And there was one Republican justice, and I don't want to name him or her, but he or she made some indiscreet comments right at election time or right after the election when it was so close, indicating his or her strong support for George W. Bush and hoping that it would be resolved in Bush's favor. Look, justices are human beings too, and they have opinions. They're not potted plants. They come with opinions attached, batteries sometimes too, depending on the age. But I understand that. Having said that, that would be a disaster, not just for the country. If this 6-3 Republican court, and yes, I use the party label. For most of them, maybe all of them, I put an R or a D next to their name because it's easier to interpret their rulings on political subjects with a party label. And I'll tell you one thing, as John Harris from Politico pointed out in his column, I think yesterday, the Supreme Court is just begging for a crisis of legitimacy. If they continue down this road of reaching decisions that are clearly interpreted on the basis of partisanship. So all I can say is it's better for the country if that doesn't happen. I pray it won't happen. I hope it won't happen. But we'll have to be ready for it just in case it does.
Next question from Sam. How many states do we think will vote differently between their presidential and Senate contests? Honestly, my guess is 0, which would be a repeat of 2016. Miles, what do you think?
Yeah, I could definitely see a situation where we don't have any seats that split their tickets. That's definitely something that could happen. I think that said, I think some of the prospects could be Iowa. Even if Trump carries the state by a few points, most polls have the Democrat Teresa Greenfield running a bit ahead there. One state that we've talked about a lot here is Arizona. If Trump wins the state of Arizona, I think the Democrat there, where you have pretty much Captain Mark Kelly, he could maybe win that state. But yeah, overall, it's we just don't split our tickets as much anymore. I was talking again about someone the other day was asking me about the Senate elections back in 2008, and being from Louisiana, that was a state where John McCain won by 19 points, but Mary Landrieu at the same time won by 6. So you just don't see that anymore as much.
Larry, any candidates you could think of for splitting?
Well, if some of the late polls show the race in Maine for Senate tightening, and while Sarah Gideon is still ahead, it's in some polls within the margin of error against Susan Collins. Well, the one thing I think we can all be pretty sure of, Joe Biden is definitely going to carry Maine. He's carrying it running away, and maybe to the degree that he'll also pick up Maine too, which is normally much more Republican. And that will be close between Biden and Trump. But the state as a whole is going to go for Biden handily. But if Susan Collins manages an upset, and it's odd to talk about an upset involving an incumbent, but it's true. If she manages to upset expectations and win another term in the Senate, there will be an example.
Yeah, and of course, there are some Democratic upset possibilities in states like Alaska and Montana and South Carolina and Kansas. If they were to spring any of those, you would think that would be while Trump was carrying those states. But the fact that Trump probably is going to carry those states maybe makes those Senate upsets a little bit less likely. So, you may very well see it somewhere, although the trend has been toward less ticket splitting over time. And then last question that I think is going to be a good way to lead into the second half of the program. This is from Rob Spice. Going into an election night that could extend into the week, I am concerned that some pundits will sensationalize early returns in ways that could be misleading. Do you recommend any news organizations to follow for the most dependable and insightful coverage of the results? We do recommend Decision Desk HQ. We like them a lot. But I also think, and Larry, maybe you could speak to this too. A lot of the networks, they do have these decision desks that make the race calls, be it NBC News or Fox or whatever. And I think they're generally pretty good at this, that they're pretty responsible, even if the people on air may not necessarily be as responsible.
Absolutely. I think the decision desk people will be the first to tell you they wish they had some little mute device for the pundits and commentators on their networks, because sometimes they go well beyond what the decision desk has actually done or said. I have a lot of confidence in the decision desk people I know, and they've done a very good job. And even back in 2000, there were a lot of reasons why that happened, and it did cause a lot of good reforms. But on the vast majority of the calls, they were very close to reality. So I'm glad about that, but I'm going to suggest something to you. I want you to take 3 index cards, and I want you to tape them to your TV set on election night or election week or election month. And on the first card, I want you to write in big letters, patience. And then on the second card, I want you to write patience. And then on the third card, I want you to write patience. And that's my best advice for our election day, week, month, season. We're all going to have something that Americans aren't very good at, as we're proving during the pandemic: patience.
I mentioned this in the Crystal Ball today, that if you can find something else to do besides following the news on Tuesday during the morning and afternoon, I would suggest doing it, because it's just going to be so much stuff that, as we wrote this morning, a lot of smoke and maybe not a whole lot of fire. So, we'll be getting the results are going to be coming in. I think we're going to have enough of the puzzle pieces together on election night to sort of have a good sense as to who wins, as long, maybe we won't if it's close. And one other thing about the decision desk, the one I specifically remember about the people on set being different than the decision desk, is on election night 2012, Karl Rove, who's really knows the stuff very well, I have to say, but he was sort of disputing the Fox News decision desk on Ohio. And they actually, Megyn Kelly and went back to the desk, and they got in this argument, but the decision desk was right. And it was, that they had Obama winning Ohio. But that was one I specifically remember that was kind of funny from the past.
Can I add one thing,
Sure.
Kyle? That's a great example, no question about it. But as far as election Twitter, which you had mentioned earlier, and Miles knows the people very well, I want to send out a little shout out to them too, because they really follow what we do, and they pick up error and they let us know, and they have different points of view and they let us know. It's very helpful to us, and we appreciate it. We appreciate your support. We've tried to return the favor in various ways, but we hope that relationship continues. And finally, if all of you watching this and election Twitter and decision desk and all the rest, if you do your jobs well and you're really good, Kyle has assured me that at one of these future webinars, he is going to bring Albie. He is going to show Albie, and you will personally hear Albie coo about the election results. You're committed now, Kyle.
That's right. And so with that, we'll go to our interview with Scott Tranner with Decision Desk HQ. And just as a reminder, we weren't planning on doing an episode on Monday, but we're going to do it. entirely sure when that'll come out, hopefully by our usual time of 2 p.m. In the East. And also our final picks should be out sometime on Monday. And we still got a lot of work to do to try to figure this out. So we're gonna be doing that over the next several days. So thanks for tuning in. And here's Scott Tranner with Decision Desk HQ. Pleased now to be joined by our friend Scott Tranner. He is with the Republican data analytics firm Optimus. He's also very involved in Decision Desk HQ, which is really a must go-to site on any election night, particularly a November election. They do their own independent vote counts and have done a great job of it over the years. Scott, how are you?
Excellent, hanging in there. Mainlining caffeine. We got to get ready for the marathon. That's next week.
That's right, and my colleague Miles is still on the line here as well. Miles has done a lot of work with Decision Desk in the past before joining the Center for Politics, and also is a real expert on following these things at a very granular level on election night. So Scott, first question, obviously there's a lot of changes in vote method this year that we saw in the primary. Do you think, has Decision Desk HQ done anything differently this year to sort of adjust the way you're calling the races?
Yeah. Basically, obviously, we look at states like Florida and North Carolina have historically high, early votes, both by mail and in person, and even they're breaking significant records. I believe right now in the key battleground states we're looking at, we have something around the order of 50 to 55% of total expected vote already in, and more coming in every single day. And so that does affect how we look at the races on election night. So I head up the race call team. So we're going to be the ones who and not me alone, but there's several of us going to be looking at this on election night. And the vote method is extremely important, as well as how many votes are out, right? Like some of these states like Florida and North Carolina are pretty good at handling absentee ballots, and the county officials are pretty good about reporting that out to us. Whereas states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, this is new to them. So they don't have the systems, procedures, and expertise in place to communicate to folks like us, folks like the Associated Press, folks like Edison, hey, this is how many ballots are out. So that's something we're very aware of, and we're going to be very cautious to double check a lot of that stuff on election night, and to be honest, election week.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned sort of differences between Florida and Pennsylvania. I mean, I think you could sort of point to those states as maybe two of the most important in the sense that Florida is probably a must-win for Trump, and I think Pennsylvania is probably a must-win for Biden, although you could come up with different scenarios in which they win without those states. But there are really going to be big differences in terms of the timing and how these states report their votes, those two. So I wonder if we could talk about those states specifically.
Sure. So let's take Florida. Florida is good at this. They get to open up and tally and prep their votes ahead of time. Generally speaking, Florida has 2 poll closing times because they have a little portion of the state that's in the central time zone, but they have registrars that are very good within 20, 30 minutes of poll closing time, releasing a large number of votes because they've tallied the absentee vote by mail stuff. We expect those dumps. We think we're going to get those. So we're going to have a pretty good idea within an hour of poll closing in a lot of these counties. And we think it's possible, depending if someone is going to, quote unquote, run away with it. And by run away with it, get a 2-3 point lead here. We could know Florida well before midnight. And by well before midnight, sometime between 10 and 11:30, which, is a little bit earlier than you're thinking. And that wouldn't be unexpected given, Florida's got a good election administration. They've got history doing this. They've got good rules in place. And we think it's possible. The one thing about Florida, I'll note, like, Rick Scott has won 2 gubernatorialships and a Senate statewide there. I'm gonna paraphrase here, but every time he's won by less than 100,000 votes, and that's pretty close. We all remember what happened last time. Florida, both them and Governor DeSantis were in a recount. So Florida's going to be one of those things where they're going to be good at counting votes, but historically it's been very close, especially for Republicans. So that would be the take up there. Moving up to Pennsylvania, watching them in the primary, especially Philadelphia and some of the outer counties, they just struggled with all of the new rules and regulations and processes put in place around COVID. And unfortunately for them, COVID hit and they didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare. So that is the X factor. These rules and regulations have been in place. This process has been in place. These county registrars and elections officials have had some time to put it in place. So we think it'll be better. But Pennsylvania has had a record amount of early vote by mail, and they're also the center of a lot of legal cases. Supreme Court decisions left and right, who can vote, what it can't vote. We have a couple people on our team who's been tracking that, and I would be lying to you if I have them all in my head. But we expect there'll probably be another decision or two coming around in the next few days that can affect this stuff, and so that is going to affect the vote count. We don't subscribe to the fact that there's going to be massive vote fraud or massive, some sort of nefarious things. It's just there are rules and laws in place, and the county officials are going to have to adhere to them, and that means a longer vote count. But those are the two contrasts there. Basically, the takeaway is Florida is going to be relatively smooth, and Pennsylvania is going to take longer, and it's because of these different vote methods and vote patterns.
Yeah, and I mean, based on what I think we've seen with sort of the party registration tallies, the mail-in requests and mail-in ballots submitted in Pennsylvania are like very, very Democratic.
Yes.
And we're expecting this really Republican election day vote, and so really
the red mirage, as some people have been terming it.
Right. Yeah, and the so-called blue shift that happens in other states and this is something we're used to in like California.
Yeah. Or as of late, Arizona, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. I want to ask you this question. I'm also going to ask it to Miles. He can reply after you. Is there a state? Do you worry that there might be a state where it would be kind of maybe easy to call it for Biden, and then Trump may end up winning in the end, or vice versa? Like what states do you worry about with that? So I'll let you answer, and then I'll bring
to be honest,
Miles in.
As a good race call team, we worry about that, all of them. You always want to be real scared and red team your own call. That's a good question. I'm not saying Pennsylvania is one of those, but the states that may have uneven counting, right? Like we assume they're going to count them in chronological order. They're not going to mix them up. There is no rules on that, but like a state like Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania, we want to be very certain we know how many votes are out left, and we want to know where some of the shift is, and we're going to wait extra long. I shouldn't say extra long. We're going to be extra sure we know how many votes are left to count there, just because, hey, Biden could be up 3 or Trump could be up 3, and we think there's not that many votes left, but these county registrars, they got boxes everywhere, and it doesn't mean there's fraud. It just means they got a lot more to count, and they got to communicate that. So I would say those 3 states we're going to be extra careful on.
Well, even in Wisconsin, too, in the governor's race in 2018, I think it looked like Scott Walker was going to win, and then there was extra votes reported in Milwaukee. So you just never know.
And I should be careful. It's not extra votes. Like that implies that all of a sudden that's my fault. Yeah. And that's the other thing you guys are good at and we're all good at. Like, look, this is an organizational nightmare for these county registrars, and it is their job, but like these things happen. It's an organizational thing. And I think we have to expect that, and we got to build that in for the people watching these elections, is that, this is like basically asking everyone to go into their attic and clean everything and make sure it's all good. But we just threw a bunch of extra stuff in their attic, at the last minute. That's what this is.
Right. Miles, what do you think about that?
I would say, even though we're sort of we've come to expect a state like California to take, a month or so, the AP has just in these recent cycles has had a number of early premature calls there. I know DDHQ usually does a good job. They're very cautious, so I'm not necessarily worried about them. More of the AP or some other election observer may call a state like that. We were just talking about Arizona as well. I mean, in 2018, I think for at least the first day or so, McSally was up. So I can see maybe a state like that.
Yeah. And, I also wonder if we're sort of used to the rhythms of election night, and we sort of know some of the patterns, like in Ohio, for instance, there are usually late counted provisionals that break a little bit more toward the Democrats. And so, usually it's a minor change, but like it looked like Sherrod Brown had won by 6 in 2018, and then you rounded up to 7 because but and those details don't really matter to a lot of people, but it's possible.
Could matter now.
If Trump is up by 10,000 votes in Ohio, and then the provisionals come in 2 weeks later and he loses, that does potentially matter. But I also wonder if those if these sort of rhythms we've come to expect might not even materialize, like are the late counted votes in Arizona going to be Democratic this time, or should we maybe expect something different? Any thoughts on that, Scott?
I guess what I would say is I think a good chunk of the rhythms are going to be repeated, and I think some of them are going to be reversed. And I don't necessarily think they're going to have the impact on some of these big high-profile races we're looking at, just because, you bring up Sherrod Brown and provisional ballots. Very rarely are provisional ballots worth 1% of a total vote. That was a unique outlier. But where this could get interesting is when you look at the House, which is not something everyone's been looking at. Senate and the president have been there. There's going to be some upsets in the House. Right now our model has the Dems netting somewhere between 5 and 10 seats. And if they pick, they're already in the majority. If they pick up 5 to 10 seats, they're winning seats like, I'm sorry to say, like a Steve Chabot in the Cincinnati area, or a Chip Roy in Texas or something like that. And those seats are going to be close. And that's where some of these rhythms are going to come into effect. And maybe tip a race a certain way, whether it be a provisional ballot, late count, or a different, when some of these ballots are counted. So that's a long way of me saying is I think it will, but it's not necessarily going to be on these big races with tens of millions of votes. It's going to be on some of these congressionals with 300,000-400,000 votes, where these rhythms can really move it around, and races that aren't normally close are.
For those of us who are going to be watching the election on the East Coast, and of course you have a handful of poll closings in Indiana and Kentucky at 6 p.m. In the East on election night. There's some poll closings at 7. Are there places that people should be looking for, early in the night, as we're all sort of trying to get whatever scraps of data we can find that maybe, you guys are going to be looking at, or that we should have been historically helpful in the past?
Yeah, it's funny. We are putting some of that together right now. Like all good election nerd, I've noticed Miles has tweeted a few of those out, and I think Wasserman has a few of those. So we're definitely going to mark some of those down. I think our biggest thing is going to be Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, Miami-Dade's AB/EV dump early on. I'm not telling you anything. Everyone's going to be looking at those, but I think those where we can get some large vote totals is going to get us where it's at, is going to get us a good early thing. And then Iowa, which is not necessarily, it's a Central Standard Time one, but Iowa's good at vote counting. There's AB/EV, and that is going to be a big indicator state overall, Biden or Trump. It's a state Trump won pretty handily last time, but it appears to be in the toss-up column now. We believe it to be in the toss-up column. I think you guys do too.
Yes, we do.
And that's going to, where we see some votes come out of, Blackhawk County, in and around Des Moines, things like that. That's going to be some indicators for us. There'll certainly be some more, but stuff like that, places like that are going to be big early canaries in the coal mine, I guess.
Miles, would you add anything to what Scott mentioned about sort of early signals?
Not really. I would say, I guess this wouldn't be as applicable to this year, but back in 2014, I knew it was going to be a bad night for the Democrats because one of the first states to report is Kentucky, and with Eastern Kentucky specifically, Mitch McConnell was winning some counties in Eastern Kentucky very easily that had never voted for him. So,
Miles, that's a great point. I remember that too. That race was called almost immediately, I think. And look, no one really, a lot of people didn't think that McConnell was really going to lose, although that was a race that got a lot of investment or whatever. But the fact that it was called so quickly was indicative, as you say, of a good night for Republicans. Just one final point, or one final question. I think you've kind of addressed it a little bit, but obviously some of these states we got to see how they reacted during the primary for COVID. Some may have done well, some may have done poorly. Are there any sort of standout states that were sort of problematic or did a good job in the April, May, summertime that might be indicative of what we could expect for election night?
So ones that did a good job despite all this.
Good or bad. Anyone that stands out to you.
Ohio is actually one that kind of stands out in the sense that they had some interesting drama where the governor and Frank LaRose secretary kind of sued each other and back and forth. But I think Frank LaRose specifically has done a really great job over the last few months encouraging vote by mail, being transparent on some of these things, making sure some of this stuff goes smoothly. I don't know all the mechanics, going on at the county level, but I would imagine they're doing things from what we're hearing from our county officials is they're doing things to make sure that there's, these county registrars have the funds that the state can allow and the process is allowed to count that. So I think Ohio is going to be an example of a good one. I think an example of a potential problem one is, I hate to say it, is like a Maryland or Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is obviously a focus because of the presidential, but I think that, and they're almost a victim of their not their doing it. There's a lot of court cases that are being decided and then forcing these county registrars to make different decisions or move around it. And it's almost like they're kind of in a sea of their own, of someone else's making. So I think that'll be a problem. Maryland's gonna be another interesting one. They had a big problem in the primary, especially they had a lot of inner city Baltimore, like city council seats and things like that. That took a while. There was a lot of mismanagement there. And I think, Larry Hogan's been pretty good about this, as a governor, has a pretty high approval rating for a governor of handling COVID. And I think he's aware of it, but it's still a city administration. So I think Maryland's one of those states we're looking at.
New York State too. That one's
New York.
Really
I think they're
long
still counting one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we saw some of that stuff. I didn't get a chance to wrap my head around it completely, but yeah, the city of New York had some issues around their vote stuff. There was a lot of, I don't know how much of it's political bluster going back and forth between Cuomo and de Blasio and how much of it's real, but usually where there's smoke, there's fire. So there's probably something there.
I lied. I actually have one final question. And that is that we probably are maybe not going to have as many puzzle pieces in terms of all the results, that we're used to. But do you think we'll have enough to sort of have a good sense as to what happened?
That's a good question. I think you have to, the way I'll answer that question is it depends on what your threshold for certainty is. Right. So at DDHQ, we wait till we're over 99% sure. Are we going to be over 99% sure on election night? No. Are we going to be, this group of people, Miles and Kyle, like you guys are all pretty astute. If we're not going to, unfortunately, but if we're all sitting around having a beer looking at the results, I imagine we're all going to be probably 60-70% sure somewhere around midnight to 2 a.m. And while, most of the people watching this won't be able to have a beer with us, you'll be able to follow your guys' Twitter feeds and probably get a take on that. I think the expert watchers will be 60-70% sure somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m. and maybe a little bit earlier if they're looking at it through the DDHQ results. But, I think there'll be some pretty good keys out there.
And I guess, people ask me that question too. And it's like, well, how are we going to know? Well, is it close or not? If it's close, we're probably not going to know for a while. Whereas if it's not close, we're going to get some signs. And we talked about, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Georgia. Those are all states that Trump probably needs to win. And so if any of them flip to Biden, that's probably a bad sign. But if he sticks with all of them, that's where this thing could go on for a while. Trump could win.
Yeah.
So with that, Scott, really thanks for joining us today. And make sure you guys look at Decision Desk HQ on election night. It's a great site. Scott's firm Optimus also has a really good election model that they've been using for projecting presidential race, Senate, and House. Scott, is there anything else you want to plug?
Oh, no, just that. I guess our team did a great job. Our model got accepted. It was peer reviewed and accepted to the Harvard Data Science Review yesterday. So we had a bunch of really smart statisticians say that us lowly political scientists do know how to do a little math. So really pleased about that. But yeah, please do follow these guys on Twitter. They're going to be the ones better than us, and look at the results on Decision Desk or any of the clients we got there, and make sure you're caffeinated. This is going to go a while.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Scott. We appreciate it.
All right. Have a good day, guys.